This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Emerging market stocks traded flat today. That's after rallying over the last few sessions on hopes of an economic recovery from the pandemic-induced slump. Now, MSCI's index of emerging market shares held near 12-week highs today. That's after surging 7.2% over the last 4 days. South Africa's JSE was weaker. Investors were mixed after trade tensions between the US and China appears to be worsening. In Egypt, the EGX 30 index was almost 2% higher today. That's after the government announced plans to reopen its economy in the second half of June. Now, also coming up on today's show, Egypt rolls out plans to reopen its economy amidst rising COVID-19 cases. China becomes the leading investor in Tanzania. That's after pumping over $7 billion into the nation's economy. And the European Central Bank takes further dramatic measures to boost the Eurozone economy. Well, we begin the hour tonight in Egypt, where the government is set to reopen its economy in the second half of this month. That is despite the surge in COVID-19 infections. Now, since mid-March, the North African nation has imposed a night curfew and a partial lockdown. The move is part of precautionary measures to curb the spread of the global health emergency. From Cairo, here's CGTN's Adel El Mahoui.
Egypt is starting to open up the country under strict preventive measures. Businesses have been struggling under the pandemic, and they've been lobbying to gradually return to regular operation hours. The government has been responding positively to these requests. Banks increased their working hours this week and are aiming to go back to a full 8 hours working day by the end of this month. The Egyptian cabinet is saying all services and businesses will be allowed to operate. Their work resumption plan, however, will be divided into phases. It is planning to open mosques and churches starting June 20th. Movie theaters, restaurants and cafes will follow. They will all operate at limited capacity, though. A few hotels have been allowed to operate, accommodating local visitors. More will follow as the summer vacation season approaches, but all hotels must follow the Tourism Ministry's COVID-19 regulations. With many European and regional countries preparing to resume flights, Egypt's national carrier aims to join. This will allow tourism to pick up. Aviation officials are now recommending that arriving passengers should self-quarantine at home. Officials are expecting the number of COVID-19 infections to go up, but the government says its entire coexisting with the pandemic plan could come to a complete halt or even get reversed if the risks of infections get higher than their current speculations. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, let's go to Nigeria now, where 5 airports are set to resume commercial scheduled flights starting June 21st. That is according to the country's aviation authority. Now, the regulator says the move is part of measures to ease COVID-19 restrictions. Nigeria closed its airports on March 13th due to the surge in the numbers of cases. Only emergency and essential flights, such as cargo transportation, have since been operating. Now, so far, the West African nation has confirmed over 11,000 COVID-19 cases, with at least 315 deaths. About 3,329 have recovered from the novel virus as of June 4th. Now, in Kenya, the private sector continues to face sharp falls in the levels of activity and demand this month, or back in May. That's amid the ongoing travel restrictions due to COVID-19. Last month, the market Stanbic Bank Kenya Purchasing Managers Index came in at 36.7. That is higher than April's 34.8. but it's still well below the 50 mark that separates expansion from contraction. Now, during the month under review, output was noted to have declined at a steep pace. That's as companies reduced activity and customers stayed away to slow the spread of the novel virus. There was also an overall fall in input prices, the sharpest in over 5 years, owing to ongoing efforts to lower spending and salaries. Now, South Africa's mining industry is in talks with the government to allow foreign miners to return to work. Mines in the world's biggest producer of platinum were given the green light to ramp up operations to 100% from the 1st of this month. However, an estimated 45,000 foreign workers are yet to return back to work, as CGTN's Angela Coppola now explains.
The first batch of 9,500 mine workers, mainly from Zimbabwe and Mozambique, have been registered for the process by the South African mines that they work for. According to the Council, they have obtained special dispensation from the National Department of Health to bring the mine workers back, and that's despite the country's borders still being closed due to the COVID-19 national lockdown measures. The miners will meet at a designated area in each country, they'll be tested there, and if they pass, will be transported through the borders and to those mines that they're going to be working at. Once they get to the mines, they'll be placed in a 14-day quarantine period at the facilities near the mine before they get back to work. The Council did confirm that its member mines only have 7,000 quarantine beds at the moment. So no more than 7,000 workers will be travelling in that first phase. The remaining 2,500 workers will need to wait for those quarantine beds to become available. The South African mines have been ramping up production since May 1. And we understand that they will need at least until the end of June to reach near full production. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, gold mining firm AngloGold Ashanti says it aims to gradually ramp up to 50% capacity at its Mponeng mine in South Africa. Now, the move comes after closing operations for over a week now, after almost 200 workers tested positive for COVID-19. The gold miner said it began a phased restart at Mponeng, which is the world's deepest mine, on Monday with 4 crews. That's just 9% of the normal full complement of 44 crews. Now, all mines in South Africa have been allowed to operate at full capacity from Monday, when the country further eases COVID-19 restrictions. But some workers, especially those employed at deep mines, have raised concerns about returning to work in an environment where social distancing is difficult. Well, now let's take a look at some of our other corporate headlines today. Mozambique's National Petroleum Institute expects ExxonMobil's final investment decision on a $30 billion gas project in the north of the country to come in 2021. Now, the oil giant's decision on the project, which had been expected this year, was postponed in March. That's as the COVID-19 pandemic and an oil price slump forced companies to delay their projects as well as cut spending. Meanwhile, Kenya Breweries Limited says it will increase the price of its bottom-end beer, Senator Keg. The move is in response to a plan to hike taxes on sorghum-based alcoholic drinks. According to Kenya's breweries, the proposal by the country's treasury will slash a demand for keg by more than a half. That's at a time when the brand is already staggering from the ongoing COVID-19 containment measures. And the world's biggest luxury goods firm, Louis Vuitton, has cast doubt over its planned $16 billion takeover of US-based jeweler Tiffany's. LVMH agreed to acquire Tiffany last November. However, COVID-19-induced turmoil on financial markets has overshadowed that deal. Tiffany's share price tumbled in March on the back of expectations that sales of its luxury jewelry will fall. Although the stock did recover, it has fallen again this week. And that is a look at our corporate headlines. Well, we are heading into a short break now, still coming up on the show. China becomes the leading investor in Tanzania after pumping over $7 billion into its economy. And two of South Africa's biggest private airlines to resume domestic flights as the country eases its lockdown.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. Now, China has leapfrogged its Western peers to become the biggest foreign investor in Tanzania. The relationship between China and Tanzania started back in the 60s when China undertook the construction of projects like the 1860-kilometer-long Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority in the 1970s and the Urafiki textile mills. Now, China's total investment in Tanzania has exceeded $7 billion. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
2020 marks 56 years of economic and diplomatic relations between Tanzania and China. Evidence of this relationship is not hard to find. The Tanzania-Zambia Railway is the longest in the nation, and its first ever textile factory, Rafiki, were both constructed by the Chinese government back in the early 1970s. Beijing has since assisted with numerous infrastructure and aid projects all over the country. Shu Yan Wang came to Tanzania 20 years ago. She says the nature of business between the two countries has changed.
Business investment has become more and more. Besides the construction sector, now more people have come to factory, manufacturing and trading, and even financial institutions have come to Tanzania right now.
Data from the Tanzania Investment Center shows that in 2014 alone, the country accounted for 16.3% of China's foreign direct investment to Africa, making it one of the major recipients of China's aid to the continent. It has received more than 100 cooperative projects and programs worth over $2 billion since the early 1960s.
Now, speaking of China becoming a superpower, when you become a superpower, you tend to turn into a donor nation. So China is now a donor nation. We get support from China financially. So apart from economic ties, then financial support which is coming in terms of donation.
China is also the largest project contractor in Tanzania, with investments ranging from infrastructure, mining and agriculture, to manufacturing, hotels, real estate and banks. The long history between the two countries positions Tanzania as one of China's favorite trading partners. The history of trade between Tanzania and China extends beyond 5 decades, and it seems it is still going strong. According to Tanzania's Ministry of Trade and Industry, China has been Tanzania's largest trade partner for the last 3 consecutive years. Trade volumes between Tanzania and China last year alone stood at $4 billion. According to the Tanzania Investment Center, over 200 Chinese companies have investments in Tanzania. The number is expected to grow. It is hoped that the relationship between Tanzania and China can continue to bring mutual benefit for its people. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Let's move on now to South Africa. 2 of the country's biggest private airlines will start flying between local airports this month, and that's after the government eased lockdown restrictions aimed at containing the coronavirus. However, both airlines say that recovery could take at least 3 years. Airlink has started taking bookings on its websites for flights from June 8th, while Safair Air is taking bookings for flights resuming on June 15th. Budget state airline Mango plans to resume flights on June 15th as well, but it is yet to get the final approval from the Department of Public Enterprises. Now, amidst a halt in operations for around 2 months now due to the coronavirus lockdown, airlines have seen their revenues fall to close to zero, while continuing to spend money on aircraft maintenance, salaries, as well as debt servicing. And still in South Africa, the tourism sector has received a further $1.7 million from the government. The sector has been hit hard by its closure amid the COVID-19 lockdown. Now, while South Africa is now moving to reopen, experts are saying it may still be a few months until tourism picks up. From Johannesburg, here's CGTN Sumitra Naidu with more.
Certain areas of tourism in South Africa have reopened under Level 3 restrictions. Government has allocated additional funding to tourism guides to help them prepare.
We have set aside a total of 30 million rands, which will provide financial relief over a period of 2 to 3 months for the tourist guide. The opening up of hunting will also be a big boost to the tourism sector. The hunting industry contributes an estimated 2 billion direct spending annually to the tourism sector, and it also contributes to employment in the rural areas.
A full reopening of tourism in the country may only occur by September. Domestic flights have resumed, but only for those permitted to work and essential services.
The first phase of recovery for the sector will be driven by domestic tourism, followed by the regional tourism and international tourism. Although we will be gradually opening up the sector in the coming months, depending on how the virus is spread, we expect that the sector will only fully recover towards the end of this year.
Tourism was only supposed to open on level 1 and level 2. And for us to get some few aspects to open up on level 3, it's a positive. This helps us to build confidence, for the region and also for the international markets to see that we are ready.
Business travel is a significant contributor to the economy.
Opening up the sector further has other implications on other parts of the economy. When you open up leisure, you must also open up inter-provincial travel, right? And so that becomes key. And that's not a tourism thing, but it's a country thing about inter-provincial travel.
You can have multiple things happening at the same time to help the industry to recover. International tourists are quite important. They contribute 120 billion rand, in terms of the spend. So it's a quite important part of our sector, and we'll love to see that returning. And we know that is going to be competitive.
Government set aside $3,000 each for SMMEs in the tourism sector to help them get through the crisis. It's hoped all businesses will be able to return once the lockdown is fully lifted. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Now, the World Food Programme has sent direct cash transfers to 150,000 vulnerable people in South Sudan's capital of Juba. The United Nations body says more than half of South Sudan's population of 11 million people face acute food shortages. That's a crisis made even more difficult by the ongoing COVID-19 chaos. Here's CGTN's Patrick Oyet with the details.
The effects of COVID-19 are worsening the food security situation in South Sudan. Non-essential businesses have been closed since March, and food prices are rising because very little is being imported. Truck drivers importing food are tested before being allowed into the country. The process takes days. Coupled with low oil prices, that has left the government running out of money. Civil servants have gone months without salaries. Many South Sudanese people are now unable to afford basic commodities. Some businesses are closing down.
Business is down because people are fearing no movement. Yeah, even for us here, we are down. Look at it, nobody. From the morning we are sitting, no business.
The humanitarian situation in South Sudan was dire even before the emergence of the coronavirus. Flooding in most parts of the country in December last year washed away homes, crops and livestock. Now, most parts of the country are flooding again, and years of civil war have denied many farmers the opportunity to cultivate.
We have to keep supply lines moving. We have to keep humanitarian assistance taking place in order to ensure that countries like South Sudan can get through COVID-19 without making all of the challenges it already faces that much worse.
The WFP says it has given more than 2.6 million people 3 months of food assistance as part of its COVID-19 response. South Sudan's government estimates that 65% of the population lives below the poverty line. Impact of COVID-19 on the economy is making the already dire food security situation even worse. Many here who are already dependent on aid could need help for even longer. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
Well, let's head to northern Nigeria now, where one woman is breaking the norms in the male-dominated coffin-making industry. Now, data from Nigeria's National Bureau of Statistics shows that there are more unemployed women than men in the West African nation. Many women there are now venturing into fields they previously steered clear of. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Mekalam reporting.
Famous female coffin maker Loveth Ugochukwu putting work into her craft. As a trained seamstress, nothing prepared the mother of 6 for the journey into her newfound trade. But Loveth lost everything during the sectarian violence that rocked north-central Plateau State in 2001. So her quest for survival put her on a path to a male-only craft.
I did not choose to do the work, but after the crisis, we left with nothing. So I have to do the work anyhow, at least to look for survival, to at least to put food on my table, to take care of my children, and to do other things. When some men come here, they will say, wow, a woman doing caskets, even them as a man, they are not free entering the place. Surprise to them, seeing a woman doing the work. Even some will park with their car, looking, is it really a woman?
After her decade-long apprenticeship, Loveth Ugochukwu launched her business with a capital of about $800. Now she rakes in about $100 to $600 per casket, and she makes 2 or 3 caskets a day. Despite being successful at her trade, Loveth still meets subtle gender discrimination.
It's a lot of challenge. Being that I'm a woman, you know, sometimes you go to the Katako, buy the wood, you know, tell them what to do. They will say, you know, they will keep on questioning you. Why do you want it like this? Because maybe they say I'm a woman. But I thank God at least I can be able to overcome it.
Nearly half of Nigeria's 200 million strong population are females. A huge number of them are affected by the unemployment crisis. But Loveth is changing that narrative. With 8 employees on her payroll, she's looking to expand her business further and train more women to become self-reliant. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN, Plateau, Nigeria.
You are watching Global Business Africa. We're taking a short break now, still coming up on the show. The European Central Bank takes further dramatic measures to boost the Eurozone economy. And bars and restaurants reopen in Paris under strict restrictions.
Again, he can hold in guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your time. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at the crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's recap today's top headlines now. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has held talks with Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj in Ankara, Turkey. Now, the talks come amid military gains by forces allied to Libya's government of national accord, which is backed by Turkey. On Thursday, government forces announced that they have regained control of the entire Tripoli. It is not known when the talks will be held, but analysts say government military gains could hasten a truce. However, the United Nations has announced that both sides have agreed to talks. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 2 more people have tested positive for the Ebola virus in Equateur province in the western part of the country. Now, earlier this week, Congolese authorities confirmed tests that show that 4 people had died of Ebola in the western city of Mbandaka. Health officials say the 2 outbreaks are the same strain of the virus, which means the same vaccines can be used to help contain its spread, although they are not thought to be linked. Now, the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, also known as UN-MISMA, has made a command post available to the G5 Sahel Joint Force in Bamako. Now, the command post is the 3rd of its kind and will enable the G5 Sahel force to fight effectively against terrorism in the Sahel region. The handover ceremony took place in the presence of representatives of the G5 Sahel forces, the United Nations, together with the Chinese and the Malian authorities. And finally, Egypt is set to reopen its economy in the second half of this month. That is despite the surge in COVID-19 infections. Since mid-March, the North African economy has imposed a night curfew and a partial lockdown. The move is part of precautionary measures to curb the spread of the global health emergency. And that is a look at our top headlines today. And now to some international news. The European Central Bank has taken further dramatic measures to try to boost Eurozone economies, as of course they face the biggest recession since World War II. Just months after emergency measures, the central bank said it will increase the size of its bond buying program by about $672 billion to over $1.5 trillion. The program will run until June 2021, 6 months longer than planned. The move will keep borrowing costs low for countries and firms as they face huge budget deficits and recessions. The central bank has also decided to hold its interest rates at record lows. Meanwhile, China says it will ease flight restrictions on foreign carriers. The Civil Aviation Administration of China says starting June 8th, it will let foreign airlines now blocked over coronavirus concerns to resume limited flights. The carriers will be allowed once per week flights into a city of their choice, and all airlines will be allowed to increase the number of international flights involving China to 2 per week. But this comes with a prerequisite. There must be no incoming passengers on their flights testing positive for COVID-19 for 3 consecutive weeks. Now, Singapore has slashed its growth forecast for the 3rd time this year. The GDP is expected to shrink by up to 7%, effectively sending the city-state into its deepest economic downturn. Here's CGTN's Miralu with more.
Singapore is heading towards its worst recession on record, as the trade-reliant economy bears the brunt of a fall in global demand, border closures and trade restrictions, plus its own internal lockdown measures. The country's Ministry of Trade and Industry has downgraded its growth forecast for 2020 and now projects the economy to shrink by 4 to 7% this year.
The second quarter will be the bottom of the cycle, and we will start to see some stabilization in the third quarter. We only begin to see positive year-on-year growth only in the second quarter of next year. It will take 24 months for real GDP to return back to pre-COVID levels.
To cushion the economic impact of COVID-19, Singapore announced its 4th stimulus package, the Fortitude Budget, bringing its total measures to about $66.5 billion. The latest budget focuses on job creation and supporting businesses to retain and retrain workers.
The government has introduced the SG United Jobs and Skill Program, which aims at helping about 100,000 workers cope with the pandemic and also enable them to pick up new skill sets and also take on new jobs.
Experts warn that despite these measures, job losses are inevitable. DBS Bank has projected that at least 45,600 workers will be retrenched this year, taking the country's overall unemployment rate up to 3.6%.
You're still essentially talking about 20% of GDP. So it's not going to be offset the slack in external demand. It's not going to turn around a recession to growth. All it can really do is try to help as many businesses as possible to retain workers, create jobs.
The economic outlook is equally grim for the rest of Southeast Asia.
Across the ASEAN 5, all of us will be in deep recession in the second quarter, a various degree. Over in Europe, we do have a very sharp downturn, so demand is going to be very severely impacting the textile industry, for instance. So the smaller emerging economies of the ASEAN, although they may not be adversely affected by the pandemic locally at home, but in the end market, the landscape is still relatively vulnerable. We may still see very sharp rate of contraction.
Experts say that a revival of demand from China, the US, and Europe will be critical to Southeast Asia. But they have warned that risk factors like tensions between China and the US, infection rates abroad, and the containment of the virus locally will have a considerable impact on the region's road to recovery. Miralu, CGTN, Singapore.
Now, auto giant Volkswagen is seeing sales come back stronger than expected in China. It is not letting the pandemic slow down its electric ambitions either. Volkswagen China just announced a $2.4 billion investment to up its stake to 75% in its joint venture with GAC Motors. That's as well as investing in battery maker Gotion. What's in the VW playbook from here on in? Well, CGTN's Cheng Lei finds out from Dr. Stefan Wallenstein. He is the CEO of Volkswagen China.
What we are doing on JAC Volkswagen is not only to lift the shares by the further capital injection in the company, but we will also join hands with the Anhui Sasak on the JAG, where we mutually go for a 50-50 to really control via the JAC also our joint venture. But this is all alongside also our second one. I'm pretty sure you are going to talk to me about this one.
Goshen.
Goshen, yes. This all pays nicely together, not only because they are both located in Hefei, but they are, let's say, both the flip side of a coin in terms of our electrification strategy. Now, with the different stakes, we have more opportunities. Herbert Dies last week also stated we now, with this management control and the full consolidation of the joint venture with us, gives us opportunities, for instance, to even put IPRs into this setup, which is slightly more difficult in the traditional joint ventures. So there is more chance, but this all is working around our electrification strategy.
So you will introduce mature brands into the JAC joint venture?
We will not too much experiment on the branding part of what we do in JAC Volkswagen. In terms of product share, yes, more on the upper end, but what also a key topic is where Goshen comes also particularly into play is on the entry part. And you know, about 40% of the cost of a battery electric vehicle is on the battery. And you see a trend in the industry recently that everybody is now finding, for various reasons, a new cell chemistry called LFP. It's lithium iron phosphate battery, which has some advantages, some disadvantages, but along the advantages is certainly that it's about 15-20% cheaper than the traditional lithium ion battery. And in this respect, this of course enables us to reach in a profitable manner without government subsidies price points in the market where of course a massive volume and a big demand from customers is about.
So how are sales going? Because the industry body is saying that after a strong April, we're seeing a rebound in car sales for May as well. What's the Volkswagen picture?
China so far seems to be a V-curve. We had a dramatic February, as you know, 75-80% down on the total market. March was already substantially better with only 50% down. Volkswagen Group, fortunately, we had a very marginal but still a positive gain over last year. So already in April we were in the plus on a year-on-year comparison, which I guess is a fantastic sign. In a long-term perspective, of course, it's not that China is boomtown again, but I would say it's a very sound basis for all of us in the industry to continue a good business trend, and this would lead us then in the year 2021, if no backslash on COVID-19 is going to happen.
And you're also saying that there are now more first-time car buyers and they are going for the Jetta brand. Yep. And you think there'll be more consolidation in the Chinese automotive industry? Consolidation
is certainly happening. And even in the top 10 brands, you see some who are really over the past 5-6 years gaining substantially. Some, of course, are getting under pressure and are on the way of fading out. And in particular, the so-called others, so from 11 to 110, they are really losing dramatically over time. So what is quite natural also in a market like China that there is consolidation on seems to accelerate. We saw this trend already last year in the more economic driven crisis. This is further accelerated now with the COVID-19 one.
Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged world leaders to join together and focus their collective ingenuity on the search for a COVID-19 vaccine. Johnson made the call as he opened the Gavi Vaccine Alliance Summit. The virtual event is seeking to raise around $7 billion to immunize roughly 300 million children against infectious diseases within 5 years. Now, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is attending. He is expected to reaffirm China's commitment to the global fight against the pandemic. In the meantime, as researchers around the world race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine, one company is leading the way. From Beijing, China, here's CGTN's Liu Yang with a close look at the world's largest inactivated COVID-19 vaccine plant.
All geared up, researchers are entering the world's largest inactivated COVID-19 vaccine production plant, built by China National Biotech Group. It's finished in just 2 months. National biosafety experts made sure the construction standards and the quality levels meet biosafety level 3 production requirements. Experts say with the annual capacity at Wuhan Institute of Biological Products The two will produce more than 200 million doses of inactivated COVID-19 vaccines annually.
我们在全力的同时在推进这种国际合作。
We are now working with the WHO and 20 other countries to advance international cooperation and clinical and subsequent use of the vaccine. Next step, as required by Chinese President Xi Jinping, we will bring vaccines to the world as a global public health product.
Experts stress that in terms of effectiveness, the current inactivated vaccine, which developed with extensive testing on 7 types of animals, including monkeys, mice, and rabbits, and combined with other physical and chemical tests, all have proven their effectiveness. More than 2,000 people have participated in Phase 1 and Phase 2 clinical trials, and the data shows that the incidence and degree of adverse reactions are much lower than that of all kinds of vaccines.
After receiving the first dose of the vaccine, I had no discomfort, and my family members and relatives were also interested in joining the vaccine research.
Since the first vaccination, I've been keeping good living habits, filling in observation records, and providing standard data as required by the doctor.
With a history of more than 100 years, China National Biotech Group is the oldest biological blood products company in Asia. It supplies more than 80% of China's immunization program vaccines. The company also launched several research projects, such as the use of 20 heavy respiratory pathogens tests and the development of specific immunoglobulin for the treatment of COVID-19. Experts say there's an unprecedented race to develop COVID-19 vaccine worldwide at record speed. At the moment, more than 100 candidate vaccines are in development worldwide, 10 of which are already in clinical evaluation. The COVID-19 outbreak also serves as a reminder that the outbreak is not a matter of some people or one country, but a shared global challenge. Liu Yang, CGTN, Beijing.
Let's go to Portugal now, where international flights are resuming and hotels are finally reopening. The country has so far managed to keep a low number of COVID-19 cases. However, as CGTN's Mia Alberti now explores, one of its main tourism destinations is suffering from major economic losses.
The beach season has finally arrived in the south of Portugal, but the tourists have not. The Algarve, a popular summer destination in Europe, has up to now been mostly spared by COVID-19. But with 2/3 of the economy dependent on international tourism, it isn't immune to major economic losses. In April, occupancy rates virtually dropped to zero. Unemployment is up by 123%, and revenues have fallen by 85%.
Being the main destination in Portugal and having tourism as the main engine in terms of local economy, we saw a huge impact, which is something that I can't remember a situation like this.
This beachfront resort is one of the many affected. Without foreign visitors, it remains mostly empty.
The economic losses this year in terms of bookings might achieve 1.5 million months. We know will not be a summer like we are used to with full occupancy, but my perspectives are not so bad.
Tourism is crucial not only for the Algarve. It represents 15% of Portugal's national GDP. As travel restrictions ease, the country hopes to win back some of the trade. Portugal created the Clean and Safe program, a certification given to hotels and businesses that follow strict sanitary rules, like social distancing, masks, and special cleaning protocols. And the government also says travelers won't have to quarantine.
In not so far past, Europe has had security problems. And once again, Algarve and Portugal was the safe place to be. It was a different situation, but now, even regarding this sanitary need, we were also the place to be in terms of safety.
Hotels, parks and beaches are gradually reopening across Portugal, and some international flights have already resumed. this summer will be like no other, with Portugal set to lose up to 7 million visitors this year. But Algarve authorities are confident that the season can still be partially saved, and the government hopes that tourism will be the key to recover from this financial crisis, just like it did in 2008. Mia Alberti, CGTN, in the Algarve, Portugal.
Meanwhile, in France, bars and restaurants are reopening as the country continues to ease out of the lockdown. Nonetheless, indoor dining is still not allowed in the capital, Paris. Other towns, however, can open up fully, with owners hoping for a busy summer. With the details, here's CGTN's Ross Cullen.
The simple pleasure of a meal with friends. After more than 2 months of lockdown, France's famous restaurants serving customers again.
I think the timing was right. You have to take your mask off to eat and drink, so it's not the same as other businesses. Of course, it's been hard for restaurants that had to stay closed, and we missed coming here, but it was for safety reasons.
It's amazing to be back here. It's nice to see people again and be outside with this amazing weather, to see friends and have a social life again.
And although the past 2 months have been tough, there's optimism for brighter times ahead.
Today wasn't great, only a few for lunch, but slowly people will be more confident. I want to say to all the restaurant and hotel owners in France that we'll be fine. It's our French culture, it's our life. We'll be fine.
The now familiar sanitary rules in place. Tables kept distant, hand sanitizer on the door, even the menus have a QR code to avoid people touching them. The hospitality sector was hit hard by the nationwide shutdown. This week, the finance minister warning of a very brutal shock to the economy.
It was a very stressful situation. We managed to maintain a certain level of activity with takeaways, but with only limited staff. We had to change our way of doing business.
Most of France is labelled a green zone, where the coronavirus is circulating less actively than in orange areas like Paris. Only green zone cafes can open their indoor areas, those in the capital restricted to outside terraces.
Due to the continuing pressure on intensive care units in hospitals, Paris is coming out of lockdown more cautiously than other parts of the country. But cafe terraces are filling up, and owners are hoping to open their indoor dining areas later this month.
Parisians are at least free once more to walk in the city's parks and gardens, enjoying the early summer sunshine. In a country famed for its food and drink, baskets of bread and bottles of wine are back on the menus, and customers back at the bistros. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
Well, let's now turn our attention to commodity markets today. Oil prices dropped about 1%, reversing gains in the previous session. There is some concern whether major crude producers will be able to agree to extend record output cuts. Also, a huge build in U.S. inventories has stirred up more worry over a supply glut in the sector. Meanwhile, gold prices rising today after an equity rally yesterday sparked gold's biggest daily fall since April 30th in the previous session. Economic optimism from easing coronavirus-related lockdown restrictions has, of course, dampened demand for the safe haven metal recently, sending prices lower by 1.3% so far this week. Well, let's take a short break now, still coming up on the show. The desire to tackle COVID-19 inspires a young man in DRC to develop a hand-washing device.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
And now to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where a young man has created an automatic hand washing machine using pieces of wood and electric cables. Now, it is yet another invention that has been inspired by the need to tackle the COVID-19 pandemic in the Central African nation, where cases of the coronavirus infection have increased across the capital, Kinshasa. Here's CGTN's Chris Ochamringa with this story.
Dominic Kalumba is a 22-year-old Congolese student of electronic engineering. He loves to design and create gadgets. In May, he conceived the idea of creating this automatic hand-washing machine after cases of the COVID-19 pandemic increased in Kinshasa. The machine has sensors that release soap and water when a hand is placed beneath them. It also has a hand dryer.
I studied for 1 year at university, but my parents couldn't afford to continue paying my tuition fees. So I stayed at home and started doing research about creating electronic equipment. I decided to make a hand washing machine following a rise of cases of the coronavirus in my country.
Most electrical appliances sold in the DRC are imported from abroad. But Dominic wants his compatriots to start promoting locally made products. His machine will be cheaper than imported ones that include shipment costs.
If you look at how countries like the US and others in Europe developed, you realize that it was through such innovations. They do a lot of research and have created large industries. We can do the same here in the DRC.
He has submitted his prototype to the government and requested for financial assistance to mass produce it. The COVID-19 pandemic has been regarded as a nightmare by many people across the world due to the economic disruptions it has caused. But Dominic Kalumba saw it as an opportunity to come up with this automated hand-washing machine. He hopes to cash in once the prototype is fully developed. His product has impressed many people in Kinshasa.
I used to hear a lot about Dominique before I met him. I was really shocked to see such a young man design an impressive hand-washing machine.
I've known Dominique for quite a long time. He is gifted in creating electronic appliances. He can repair complicated gadgets that have been dismantled and considered useless.
Dominic also plans to design a solar-powered hand-washing machine. Young innovators like him face many difficulties in the DRC. The country is still emerging from social and economic destruction caused by decades of conflict. But Dominic believes fresh ideas like his will help take the country forward. Chris Ochamringa, CGTN, Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo.
Now, after restaurants were forced to close due to the restrictions imposed to limit the spread of COVID-19, one Zimbabwean tech entrepreneur started an online pizza business to feed thousands of homebound clients. That business is now thriving amidst restrictions by serving a largely captive market. As CGTN's Farai Mwakutuya explains, the business has achieved its target for the quarter in just 3 weeks.
The immediacy of the opportunity meant the most important thing for Joseph Bunga to do was to make a start, then fine-tune things along the way.
Right, and you see, this is the thing about innovation. Eh? You constantly look at your product and say, how do I maximize? And a lot of this comes from me working in the tech sector. So minimum viable product. Don't build everything in day one. You can't. Ship small features on a regular basis and get things right. So we've constantly been looking at workflow. We've redesigned the kitchen in 3 weeks, probably 10 times. Moved things around and said, hey, that person's getting in the way of this person. Let's improve efficiency. So constantly focusing on improving efficiency.
Growth has exceeded expectations.
We are where we expected to be in 3 months at end of week 3. So huge acceleration.
That's made him bullish about the future. Joseph is an eternal optimist, and he believes that one day the world will be celebrating again, and they'll be doing so congregated around a delicious pizza.
We're already planning to expand into the region. We want to go into the middle-income markets because it's wood-fired. So 100 stores around the region. Our focus is very much delivery model, very much dark kitchen. The growth is going to come for us by expanding the types of things that we are doing in the dark kitchen. So for example, we're doing pizza now. We're already experimenting with burgers. We're experimenting with curries.
Dark or cloud kitchens are likely to get a lift from the surge in e-commerce.
Dark kitchens are kitchens that are set up with no option for a sit-in restaurant. So dark kitchens, the model is that you can have 10 different brands. For example, we could be doing a McDonald's, a KFC in a dark kitchen, but because a person is ordering from a website, they don't know where the food is coming from. They don't need all the real estate of public toilets. You know, we don't need to cater for people standing. We're focusing on what is core. Your cooking environment, your cleanliness, your hygiene.
And making sure that all the meals are of the best quality.
Opening to the public. Weeks ago, the virus shut down a historic exhibit in Rome, bringing together 120 works by Renaissance painter Raphael. Now it is seeing a reopening and a renewal.
After almost 13 weeks of closure, the much-anticipated Raphael exhibition is finally opening its doors, very cautiously with thermal scanners and hand gel at entrance. On March 8th, just 3 days after the opening of the show, it was closed as the coronavirus raged across northern Italy. The works were quickly covered with dark cloth, the doors locked.
During the 3 months of the lockdown, the works were naturally protected by following all the standards and parameters of conservation. We had people making regular rounds that were intensified in this period, and then we took a special step to protect many drawings which are particularly fragile under light. We adopted this system of total covering using black cloth, so there would be zero absorption of light. This reassured those who loaned us the works, and they made the decision to give us a long extension.
Visitors are allowed precisely 80 minutes inside. Only 85 people are allowed in each hour over the course of a 10-hour day. Organizers say 850 people have booked up every day throughout June.
There have been several symbolic elements. First is the fact that we started the exhibit on the 500th anniversary of the death of Raphael. Also, Raphael died of a fever that was probably a lung infection. In a sense, there was this link to these tragic days. And then the reopening is here for a figure so important for the Renaissance. The word Renaissance, meaning rebirth, renewal, will help us interpret this as a wellspring of renewal, a new possibility for the country.
The show traces the life of the Italian Renaissance master painter and architect, with artworks depicting his life, starting backwards from his death to his early years. It has been extended for an additional 3 months until the 30th of August. Ding Siyue, CGTN.
Well, before we go, let's take a quick look at Africa's currencies today. South Africa's rand fell for the first time in 4 sessions, down 0.5%. Meanwhile, Egypt's pound also slipping to a 7-month low against the dollar. That's its 5th straight day of losses in the wake of 2 months of trading nearly unchanged. Now, the pound has weakened 2.2% against the greenback since the start of the week. That's its biggest weekly decline since March 2017. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.